Hi friends, I'm Bryn.
And I'm Kurtis.
And this is Friends Who Crime. Friends Who Crime. Hi everybody, I am back again with another episode of True Crime. And today is super cool because I have my dad with me. Hi Dad.
Hi friends.
So tell us a little bit about you, Dad. Who are ya?
Let's see, I'm Dad.
Yep.
And I'm in the tech business. Love working on computers and computer chips. Kind of my passion. And then, playing out in the backyard. I get to grow vegetables like tomatoes and cucumbers and carrots and peas and beans. And then give them to you so you can eat them all.
Yep. We were just snacking on some fresh green beans from the garden.
So that's kind of what I do.
Yeah. Okay, so usually I ask how you know me, but it seems...
I've known you for a long time.
For exactly 29 years, 3 weeks, 4 hours.
And 9 months.
And 9 months. Yeah, true. Also, what is your opinion on true crime? How is it involved in your life?
So I've always been a crime drama kind of person rather than a true crimes person, but I have listened to the last 16 episodes of True Crime. So I'm kind of getting into it now. And in fact, I've fed you a couple of true crime ideas that maybe you will be able to use someday.
Yes, and you were the one that sent me
Hawthorne.
Yes, the one about the husband who pushed the wife off the cliff.
Yeah.
Tony, yeah. And that was a great case. That was a great suggestion. So today is obviously not one of the ones you have suggested to me because I didn't want you to know about it at all. But it's equally as intriguing as the ones you have sent me.
Very cool.
And another thing is it's really funny that I think every single person from my family, you, Mom, Logan, and Blaine, have all mentioned when I'm like, how do you know, like, what is true crime to you? You're like, well, I like NCIS. I like Criminal Minds. It's like, well, it's not true crime, but okay. But great shows.
They are, but I'm more of a Dexter Bosch kind of, get down into the nitty gritty, what's going on things. Yes.
Yeah. You like the dramatized versions.
Yes.
Which are also really good.
Yeah. Well, and oftentimes they're based on the true crimes that happened, and then they just dramatize them and make them fit in an hour.
It's true.
Plus commercials, yeah.
All right. So we're going to get into my Bryn interruption. It's pretty simple today. I am recording at my parents' house, obviously, with my dad here. And it's actually the first time I've recorded somewhere else other than my apartment. So I had to bring my whole setup with me, and we're in the cozy front bedroom. And it was just kind of easier for everybody today. And of course, in true Bryn fashion, I forgot my XLR cables for my microphones. So after work, I had to make a 20-minute drive to Guitar Center and then the 35-minute drive out to my parents' house because I forgot my cables. But I needed them anyway, because the ones I have are way too long and they get all tangled when I record, and these shorter ones are so much easier to use.
So it was a good thing.
Yes. And the universe was like, okay, it's time. You gotta go buy some new cables. Also, related to that in a full circle way, my plants that I've been growing, the episode with Blaine, I talked about how I do not have a green thumb. I have the opposite of a green thumb, maybe a black thumb. And I did forget to water them for a week. But then it rained a bunch.
Oh, good.
So it saved them.
Because they were outside?
Yes. And I had put them on the table to make sure they got rain on them. Because I was like, man, not again. So that was another universe thing of you have neglected your plants, but here you go.
And plants love rain.
Yeah.
A lot more than the water from the spigot.
Yeah. Yeah. So ultimately, not a bad thing. Ultimately, kind of a good thing. All right. Are you ready for this, Dad?
I am. Hit me with your best shot.
I am going to with this one. Today we are diving deep into a case that has haunted this really small California mountain community for over 4 decades. On its own, it's brutal, but there's also really baffling investigative missteps. And it will make you mad. It'll make you want to throw your chair out the window. We are talking about the Keddie Cabin Murders. This one's gonna stick with you. It's not super well known, which was surprising to me when I started researching it. But I'll tell you right now that this is very gory and gruesome, so be prepared for some really horrifying details. And also, it's a little bit of a longer one. Not too much, but we might be pushing the 50-minute mark, so get comfy. And it's technically unsolved, but also, like, not really. Like, you'll see what I mean. The story begins in the seemingly tranquil setting of Keddie, California in 1981. So you would be, like, a teenager at this point?
Yeah, hadn't graduated high school yet.
Yeah, so I wonder if you've heard about it. We'll see. This small, rural Sierra Nevada railroad town, home to the Keddie Resort, was the kind of place where people sought peace and quiet. They were surrounded by nature, sort of this backdrop of serenity.
My Zen place.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I picture, like, the windows, mountains, wallpaper. However, it would soon be violently disrupted, creating a stark contrast with the horror that was about to unfold. The peaceful environment and the horrific crime would leave a lasting scar on this small, close-knit community. Into this quiet corner came Glenna Susan Sharp, and she goes by Sue, so I'll be calling her Sue. She was a 36-year-old single mother of 5. In July of 1979, she embarked on a journey from Connecticut to Northern California, completely across the country, seeking a new beginning after separating from her allegedly abusive husband, James Sharp. She relocated near her brother, Don. She rented a small trailer in Quincy, but then she moved into the larger cabin number 28 at the Keddie Resort in the fall of 1979. Her children included Sheila, who was 14, John, who was 15, Tina, who was 12, Rick, who was 10, and Greg was the youngest at just 5 years old. Lots of kids, all very close together. The biggest age gap here is 5 years. John, being the oldest son, had a room in the basement of the cabin with outside access, and the doors were often left unlocked for him to go upstairs where the only bathroom was located. To supplement her income, Sue enrolled in a California Education Training Act program and had a part-time job. It was during a typing class, which was part of her program, that she met Martin and Marilyn Smart. Remember those names? The Smart family.
The Smart family, okay.
Smart with 2 T's, by the way. The day leading up to the murders, Saturday, April 11th, 1981, began like any other, as it always does. It was filled with mundane, everyday activities. In the morning, Sue, Sheila, and Greg drove to Quincy to pick up Rick from baseball tryouts. On their way back to Keddie, they picked up John and his friend Dana Wingate. Later that afternoon, around 3:30 p.m., John and Dana hitchhiked back to Quincy, where they were seen downtown, possibly visiting friends. As evening approached, Sheila departed Cabin 28 shortly after 8 p.m. to spend the night with the Seabolt family in their house, which was located right next door in cabin number 27. So Sue's daughter, Sheila, is spending the night in the cabin next door at the Seabolt family's home. Sue remained at home with her 2 younger sons, Rick and Greg, and their friend, Justin Smart, Marilyn and Martin's son. The next morning, April 12th, around 10 a.m., Sheila returned to cabin 28 after her sleepover. As she opened the door, she was immediately hit by a, quote, terrible smell. As she walked through the house, her concern turned to unimaginable dread. In the living room, Sheila found the lifeless bodies of her mother, Sue, her older brother, John, and John's friend, Dana Wingate. And remember, Sheila is only 14 years old. Trigger warning for this next section. The way these victims are killed is horrifying and brutal, and if you want to skip over the details, maybe hit the skip button a handful of times. Totally fine. I get it. And I'll give you a second. Okay.
Tell me.
Hope you're gone by now if you don't want to hear this. The scene inside cabin 28 was awful, and awful doesn't even begin to describe it, really. All 3 victims were found brutally bound with a combination of medical tape and electrical cords, suggesting a deliberate, calculated act. Blood spatter evidence indicated that the murders had all taken place in the living room. Sue Sharp was discovered lying on her side near the living room sofa. She was nude from the waist down and had been gagged with a blue bandana and her own underwear, which was secured with tape. She had been stabbed in the chest and her throat was horizontally slashed, a wound so severe that it passed through her larynx and even nicked her spine.
Dang, that is deep.
Mm-hmm.
That's a sharp knife, too.
It's a sharp knife and it's a lot of force. There was also an imprint matching the butt of a Daisy 880 Powerline BB and pedal rifle. I know nothing about guns. I just picture a general BB gun, but there was an imprint matching the butt of that gun found on the side of her head, indicating that it was used as a bludgeon. Autopsy results confirmed her death was due to a combination of knife wounds and blunt force trauma. John Sharp's throat was also slashed. He also suffered blunt force trauma to his head from 1 or more hammers. He was found face up with his hands and feet bound by electrical cord. Autopsy results confirmed his death was also due to a combination of knife wounds and blunt force trauma. Dana Wingate had multiple severe head injuries and had been manually strangled to death. He also suffered blunt force trauma to his head from 1 or more hammers, and his autopsy determined asphyxiation as the cause of death.
Yuck.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. So somebody was really brutal.
Mm-hmm. I can't even think of another word to describe it. It's horrifying.
That's crazy to be that angry.
That is my first thought as well, is like, this is a crime of passion. It wasn't a crime of opportunity, right? Like, someone planned this.
Yeah, because of the tape and the electrical cords. Obviously a knife along with... And the hammer's an interesting one.
Mm-hmm. It's a claw hammer, too.
Yeah. So, it would be interesting to see what they found. And, the BB gun might have just been hanging out in the cabin, but...
Could have been.
The hammer seems like, unless they found it, it probably was something that was brought with the person.
This was a personal, calculated attack. The specific types of wounds, slashed throats, blunt force trauma, strangulation, suggest a frenzied, rage-filled assault, possibly by multiple perpetrators.
That's what I was wondering, because, that's... not everybody's an adult, but they're all fairly big people.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you get away with that unless you have multiple folks to do it?
And multiple different kinds of weapons, too, right?
Right.
The sexual humiliation implied by Sue's body being nude and gagged with her underwear points to a deeply personal motive beyond just a simple robbery gone wrong, right? This level of overkill and the variety of injuries strongly indicate a crime of passion, like I said, or extreme rage, making the motive a really crucial element of the investigation, right? They got to figure out why this happened.
Yeah. But none of the other people were treated in that fashion, right? Nobody else had parts of their clothes off.
No.
Or
nope.
That kind of thing.
It was just Sue. And the other 2 were just brutally murdered.
Right.
Just brutally murdered. In a truly baffling and chilling twist, Sue's 2 younger sons, Rick and Greg, along with their friend Justin Smart, were found physically unharmed in an adjacent bedroom, still asleep. They had slept through the whole thing. Upon discovering the scene, Sheila rushed back to the Seabolt's house next door, and Jamie Seabolt helped retrieve the 3 younger children through the bedroom window so that they didn't have to see the carnage. This is one of the most perplexing and chilling aspects of the case. The perpetrators deliberately left 3 young children alive and unharmed in the same house where a quadruple murder occurred. Notice I said quadruple murder. We'll get to that in a second. At the scene, investigators found 2 bloodied knives, a bent steak knife and a butcher knife, and a claw hammer. A bent knife means this attacker used a crazy amount of force to bend a knife. They also found a pellet, possibly from that BB rifle, and it was found on the floor between the boys' bodies, and parts of its sights were broken off in the living room, which suggests it was also used to batter the victims. That's probably where those blunt force traumas came from. So there were several different kinds of weapons, which supports the theory, like I said, that more than one person may have done this. Now to explain why we've only talked about 3 victims, but it's a quadruple murder. Amidst this horrific scene, one person was missing: Sue's 12-year-old daughter, Tina Sharp. Her disappearance immediately shifted the narrative from a triple homicide to a quadruple murder with a missing person. No one knew where she was. Did the assailants kidnap her? Was she somehow in on the attack? Since the assailants didn't hurt the children from the bedroom, maybe Tina woke up and walked into the room while all this is happening, and they didn't want to hurt her, so they took her instead to keep her from being a witness. The FBI initially investigated her disappearance as a possible abduction. However, the FBI later, quote, backed off the search, stating the California State Department of Justice was doing, quote, an adequate job. This is the first in a long list of unfortunate decisions by the authorities. For 3 agonizing years, Tina remained a missing person, with no arrests or charges filed despite multiple leads and suspects being examined. I can't imagine the family's frustration in all of this and like the actual torture that they were going through, not knowing where she was or what happened.
Yeah, so that seems strange because there'd be so much information about where she might have been.
That's all I have to say is, yep. You're right. The agonizing wait for answers finally ended, but not in the way anyone hoped. This does not have a happy ending. On April 11th, 1984, exactly 3 years after the murders, a bottle collector discovered the cranium portion of a human skull and part of a mandible at Camp 18 near Feather Falls in Butte County. This location was roughly, depending on the source, 62 to 100 miles from Keddie. The remains were confirmed by a forensic pathologist to be Tina's in June of 1984. Investigator Gamberg noted Tina was found, quote, way off the dirt road in the wild, suggesting a deliberate effort to conceal her body. The timing of Tina's discovery, exactly 3 years later, is eerily coincidental and means this was possibly a taunt or a deliberate reveal by someone who knew where she was. Like, oh, you haven't found her yet. Let me sprinkle some stuff so you can find her. It's been 3 years. You haven't figured me out yet.
Would they send a bottle collector out to that area?
I think he stumbled upon it, right? They were like, oh, you haven't found her. Let me throw some stuff in this, in a place that maybe someone would come across it. And this guy just happened to come across it.
Okay, so he just happened to be the first person.
Yeah.
But no indication of if anything had occurred in that area or if it had just been discarded in that area.
Yeah, just discarded from what we can tell. Shortly after the discovery of the remains was announced, the Butte County Sheriff's Office received an anonymous phone call. The caller identified the remains as belonging to Tina before the medical examiner officially confirmed it through dental records. This is the exact transcript of that call. I was watching the news and they were talking about the girl found at Feather Falls. I was just wondering if you thought of the murder up in Keddie, in Plumas County a couple years ago, where a 12-year-old girl was never found.
Sketchy.
And on top of that, and this is one of those things that makes me want to throw my chair out the window, this call was not documented or investigated at all. The tape containing the recording was later found at the bottom of an evidence box by a deputy assigned to the case after 2013.
Oh my word.
Like, it just makes me mad.
But then it's just the words. There's no caller ID information or anything else.
I mean, this is the 80s, yeah. Anonymous call. Special investigator Mike Gamberg believes, quote, either the caller was told what happened or he was involved in some way. The tape was later turned over for voice comparisons with audio of earlier suspects. This was obviously a profound failure in evidence handling and investigation. Was this a deliberate cover-up? Were the remains just glossed over by the authorities? And like I said, this is just the beginning of these failures from law enforcement.
But this happened 3 years after the murders. So the case had obviously, not been solved. Whoever got the call just didn't put any priority to it, it sounds like.
It wasn't even documented, which is what baffles me.
Yeah.
Like, if you get a call like that that's really suspicious and sketchy and it's anonymous, like, document it. Put it in the file.
You would think.
But no.
Whoever was doing it was busy that week with something else.
I guess. The initial investigation into the Keddie murders was plagued by issues from the outset. Early leads included neighbors, members of the Seabolt family next door, and they recalled seeing a green van parked at the Sharps' house around 9 p.m. on the night of the murders. Additionally, a couple living in nearby house number 16 reported being awakened at 1:15 a.m. by what sounded like muffled screaming, but they didn't call it in. To me, it's like, why wouldn't you call 911? You should always call 911 if you hear screaming in the middle of the night.
But if you were waking up, right, and you're like, did I hear screams? Was I dreaming? What was that? And then you don't hear them anymore. You just roll over and go back to sleep?
I see what you're saying, but I think you should always err on the side of caution.
Easy to say now.
For sure.
At 1:15 in the morning, maybe that person was not thinking straight and just was like, that must have been a dream.
I'll give it to you.
But for them to say, oh, I think I heard it later, that seems,
Sheila, the daughter, and the Seabolt family, who are next door, right, heard no commotion during the night. None of them could remember any screams, any noises. And these conflicting accounts, muffled screaming versus no commotion at all, was one of the challenges of witness testimony, especially in this really small, isolated community where details can be misremembered, can be suppressed, sort of along the same lines that you were saying, where maybe you look back and you're like, oh, okay, maybe that was connected, and I just didn't realize it at the time, One of the most controversial aspects of the early investigation involved the testimony of Justin Smart, the young friend who was one of the ones who was unharmed in the house. Justin initially offered conflicting stories of the evening, even stating that he perhaps dreamed details of the murder. In a later account, told under hypnosis, Justin claimed to have seen Sue with 2 men. Based on Justin's descriptions, composite sketches of 2 unknown men were produced. However, these sketches were created by Harlan Embry, who was an amateur described as having, and this is going to rip him apart, but, quote, no artistic ability and no training in forensic sketching. Blink, blink. This decision was heavily criticized, especially since law enforcement had access to top forensic artists from the Justice Department and the FBI, and they chose to use this guy with no experience instead. The suspects in the sketches were described as in their late 20s to early 30s, one standing between 5'11" to 6'2" with dark blonde hair, and the other between 5'6" and 5'10" with black, greased hair, both wearing gold-framed sunglasses. Justin's conflicting testimony was likely due to trauma or the influence of others, perhaps his stepfather, which made his accounts unreliable. Later analysis by current investigators, has brought forth severe criticism of the initial police response, and alleged mishandling of evidence. Special investigator Mike Gamberg, our boy Mike, later stated that the quality of the initial investigation was so poor that, quote, you could take someone just coming out of the academy and they'd have done a better job. Big oof.
Well, but it's a 40-year difference, right? From the early 80s to the early 2020s.
Sure.
Yeah. And I don't know what in law enforcement has improved, but training has probably gotten better. All the dramas that we were talking about earlier have brought light to things that maybe people know more about versus, this, I'm going to call it one horse town sheriff who might have been working it.
Regardless, though, this was not handled well or professionally, and there were a lot of things that should have been handled better, even in the 80s, even by police who maybe didn't have experience with this kind of crime. Plumas County Sheriff Greg Hagwood expressed his profound frustration, stating, quote, I am not by nature a conspiracy theorist, but there are facts and circumstances, the number and nature of which I can't ignore anymore. Key pieces of evidence were overlooked or not documented and later found buried in evidence boxes. Sheila Sharp also revealed a disturbing detail, stating, quote, I was told the suspects were told to get out of town. So to me, that means it was covered up. Does this mean there was a deliberate dismissal of crucial leads? Potentially to protect certain individuals or avoid a complex investigation that they weren't equipped for?
But they had the help of the FBI, who jumped in and then jumped out.
Right.
For whatever reason, which they didn't really say other than, they got this handled. In other words, they're not cooperating. They're not helping us. We can't do anything good here.
Right. So it kind of explains maybe why the case went cold and remained unsolved for so long. Early theories regarding the crimes being ritualistic or motivated by drug trafficking were dismissed by Plumas County Sheriff Doug Thomas in the week following the murders. He's like, nah, that's not it. He stated that neither drug paraphernalia nor illegal drugs were found in the home. And while this might seem straightforward, it's important because it narrowed down the focus of the investigation away from common crime tropes, right? And back towards this is personal and only personal. To me, it seems a little premature. If you can't tell already, I think it was premature to not follow that lead or even really consider that there was more to the crime scene than just what was found there.
Do you think maybe if it was drug related, somebody was trying to send a message?
Potentially.
Okay. I could see that.
I mean,
certainly a lot of the stuff that went on in the 80s was sending messages to others.
The investigation eventually honed in on two primary suspects. Martin Smart, who died in 2000, and his ex-con friend, Joe, gosh, I'm going to say this name wrong, Budabe?
Sure, why not? Let's call him Budabe.
Cool. Who died in 1988. These men were neighbors to the Sharps, living just 2 cabins away in cabin 26, so on the other side of the Seabolts. Martin Smart worked as a cook at the resort, but had recently lost his job just before the murders, potentially creating financial strain or increasing his volatility. He also allegedly supported his family by selling drugs and manufacturing hashish. And Keddie reportedly had a large drug house at the time. If you don't know, hashish is concentrated marijuana.
Hashish.
So this guy, Martin, just a few houses over, probably feeling angry and desperate from losing his job, and sold drugs, which the police ruled out as a motive for the crime the week after it happened.
So the hashish, when it's taken, does it act like marijuana, which kind of slows you down, makes you kind of mellow, or does it hype you up like a speed?
No, it's still marijuana.
Okay.
But but it's just really concentrated.
Yeah, but it kind of hopefully would mellow you out.
Yeah.
But maybe in this case, it made him paranoid.
That's what I was going to say is, yeah, it can make you paranoid. That's why a lot of people don't mess around with marijuana, because it doesn't make them feel good.
Right.
It just makes them feel anxious and paranoid.
Or hungry.
Or hungry. Definitely hungry. A leading theory suggests the motive was deeply personal, revolving around Smart's anger and jealousy. It's believed that Sue Sharp was counseling Marilyn Smart, Martin's wife, about leaving him due to his alleged abusiveness and infidelity. So, like, ding, ding, ding. Investigator Gamberg referred to this as a complicated triangle. Online investigators agreed Smart and Sue were involved. They don't believe that the counseling aspect actually happened. So some people believe it was a thing, other people believe it wasn't.
That she was counseling Mrs. Smart, or that maybe they had a thing going?
No, she was counseling Marilyn.
Okay.
So Sue was counseling Marilyn, telling her, you need to leave Martin because he's abusive and he's cheating on you. And Martin found out about that. And he was like, Sue is the reason that my wife is going to leave me.
Yeah. So how do I shut her up?
Right.
Which explains the shoving stuff in her mouth.
Smart had a documented history. So Martin had a documented history of violence and possessiveness. Marilyn's aunt, Joan Andrews, described Marty's violent tendencies, including practicing throwing a hatchet, trying to buy guns, and previous domestic violence against Marilyn, such as trying to run her over and pulling a knife on her in 1980.
Pulling a knife kind of fits, yeah. Now, do they know if the knives that they found at the cabin in the murder scene belonged at the cabin prior to the murders, or do they think they were brought to the cabin?
I don't know that for sure.
Okay.
Oof, I want to say they were at the cabin. Investigators believe Smart and his companions came prepared to, quote, teach Sue a lesson, and that John, Tina, and Dana got in the way. This makes the extreme violence make sense. The idea that the children were collateral damage kind of aligns with the observed crime scene where the younger children were spared in the bedroom. Maybe the other two boys just got in the way and Tina got in the way.
Well, I mean, maybe it's a domino effect, right? So the two guys were there to get Sue, right? And you'd mentioned that the door to the cabin was often left unlocked and you could come up through the basement. So imagine they came in, they found Sue there, the boys were already in the room asleep, and started wailing on her, and then these other folks came home or started to come in the rooms, right, over time. That way it would explain kind of how you handle that many victims with one or a few attackers. You know, if I went to hurt one person, got them hurt, but woke up Tina, who came out. Well, I can't maybe hurt her because she's too young, so I found her. But then the son comes home, or the two sons come home. He's got the strength that would have to be handled, and the younger son would be helping, right? Because they already saw what happened to mom.
Yeah.
So they would be naturally attacking and have to be neutralized. Then you take Tina and you head out, only to realize I can't do anything.
Right. What do you do with it?
I've got to neutralize that one too.
Ugh.
Right?
That is so awful to think about.
Because there's no letting her go. You can't make her unsee what she saw. So the only way out is to get rid of her too. You put her somewhere. You know, the only thing that doesn't make sense is if he died in 2000 and the other guy died in the late 80s, who put her body out? I guess that was only 3 years.
That was only 3 years after.
So one of them started feeling remorse?
There are some other theories about that.
Okay, we'll get into
talk
that.
About.
Okay.
Yes. So 2 critical pieces of evidence point directly to Martin Smart. He initially told investigators that a claw hammer had just gone missing from his home just like right around the time of the murders. Like, how did that happen? It just kind of, I don't know what happened to it. This hammer was later found in a local pond in 2016 near the Keddie property, and investigators believe it was intentionally put there. The discovery of Smart's hammer, matching his description of the one he said he missed, and found intentionally placed, directly links him to a murder weapon. So that's the direct link.
Mm-hmm.
After the murders, Smart fled to Reno, Nevada. Nevada.
Potato, patata.
I feel like people from Nevada say Nevada.
I always call it Nevada.
Nevada?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll go with Nevada. So he fled to Nevada. And while there, he sent a letter to his wife, Marilyn. Are you ready for this? It said, "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." Like, hello? Like, that's the most incriminating thing I've ever heard.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But here's another throw your chair out the window moment. This letter was overlooked in the initial investigation. Marilyn Smart claims she doesn't recall receiving the letter, but recognized his handwriting when she saw it again, from the evidence box later, years later. This letter is arguably a direct confession that was essentially completely ignored by early investigators and just shoved in the box.
But I mean, how would they get the letter? That's an odd one. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously they had it because it's in the evidence box.
Right. But Marilyn doesn't recall getting it from it. Strange. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, there's a little something going on there with Marilyn.
The hammer plus the letter, when combined, form a pretty strong case against Martin Smart, even posthumously. A VA counselor in Reno later came forward after Smart's death, claiming Smart confessed to the murders during a counseling session in May of 1981, just weeks after the crimes. Smart allegedly admitted to killing Sue and Tina, stating, "I killed the woman and her daughter, but I didn't have anything to do with the boys." The counselor noted Smart was, quote, "a 0 during the confession, no stress, flat effect until he mentioned Tina," end quote, at which point he indicated he'd, quote, "incapacitated her" when asked why she didn't run away. Smart told the counselor his motive was that he was convinced Sue was responsible for Marilyn wanting a divorce. Smart also allegedly bragged to the counselor that he beat a polygraph test administered by law enforcement shortly after the murders, claiming, "Those things are easy to beat. I was lying, and they let me go."
So I got to put myself way back in 1980.
Okay.
There were all sorts of 60 Minutes and 2020 things going on around these lie detector tests and how inaccurate they were.
And they still are.
Yeah. It's hard to believe that a police department would use that as a way of saying, well, he passed the polygraph. You know, he's obviously off the hook.
It was definitely more relied upon in the 80s because they didn't have DNA technology. They didn't have these forensic technologies that we have. Even like fingerprinting wasn't as accurate as it is now.
Right. I mean, that's why I was saying, I'm going back there because that was where the articles and the messaging was just getting out that these were not reliable. But you would think that, you know, if it's on the news programs, that it's pretty well known in the law enforcement circles.
You would think, wouldn't you?
I would.
And to me, it's not even so much that he passed the polygraph and they let him go, right? It's the fact that he's allegedly bragging to his therapist about it.
Yeah. Well, but I get back to the comments you made about somebody was told get out of town. The fact that he left town very, very quickly after the murders, it just makes you wonder who he knew in the police department. Plus, if he was a drug dealer, there could have been a relationship with certain parts of the police department.
Right.
Or a policeman on the police department.
Right.
To help bury stuff. Curiouser and curiouser.
Mm-hmm. And on top of that, the counselor reportedly alerted investigators at the time that they were told this by Smart, and they didn't use the confession at all. Brushed it off. And again, I ask why.
Yeah, I mean, this is just sounding more and more like a cover-up than a botched solution, or a botched investigation, but we'll keep allegedly in there.
John, the one that I don't know how to pronounce his last name and I should have looked it up beforehand, Budabe, Smart's friend and co-suspect, also had a suspicious background. He was an ex-con who moved in with Marty Smart. More significantly, he allegedly had, quote, ties to organized crime in Chicago. So again, ding, ding, ding. He also operated under at least 2 known aliases, Bobby Lake and John DeSantis. Some investigators believe the Department of Justice's decision to back off the case apparently makes sense when considering his background. These connections to organized crime add this layer of complexity and potential danger to the case and the people around it, so maybe the initial investigation was intimidated or steered away from certain avenues. And this could explain some of this perceived cover-up or reluctance to pursue leads aggressively.
No. What if John Barbacoa, or whatever his name is?
John Barbacoa!
What if he was a protected informant for the FBI or DEA or somebody like that? So they needed him to stay there, and instead they exerted their force on the local police department to just cover this thing up. And that would be why they backed out, saying, okay, I've got this. They pulled 2 people out so that there was no suspects left, unless the local police department could come up with a vagrant or something to blame it all on.
That's a good point. I'll give you that. I did not think of that.
Just imagine.
That would be this is an onion of a case, like just layers upon layers upon layers, and that adds another one.
Oh yeah, I love to make stuff up.
Yeah.
One more conspiracy.
So both Martin Smart and John Barbacoa are now deceased, with Smart dying in 2000 and Boobade in 1988. While they're considered the primary suspects, their deaths mean they can no longer be charged or directly questioned, obviously. And this is one of my least favorite parts of researching true crime, is finding people who were never brought to justice because of the failures of investigators, especially. Former Sheriff Doug Thomas expressed skepticism, saying, "It's very easy to say somebody's guilty when they're dead. They can't defend themselves." And he doesn't think either one of them were involved. However, current investigators, Hagwood and Gamberg, strongly believe the evidence points to them, and really only them. Strong evidence points to their culpability, but they'll never face justice. Now this case is a quest for truth and accountability for any living accomplices. The sad part is really the lack of closure for the families of the victims. If the people in the families weren't involved in any way, I can't begin to imagine the raw grief and despair that they went through and are probably still going through. They're definitely still going through that.
Yeah, still wondering what in the world could have happened.
What happened? Yeah. We've got these 2 guys. They're just off the top of my head, probably 99% the guys that did it, but they'll never, there's no way to concretely be like, these guys did it as of right now.
Well, but what would be the difference? Even if they could say 100% they were able to pull DNA off the knife handle or something, and it came back to, Smart and Budabe. They're dead. I don't know that I'm not sure justice can be done any longer. It's more closure.
Right. That's the thing, is I'm putting myself in the family's shoes as much as I can. I can, sympathize, but I can't empathize, or the other way around, empathize, but I can't sympathize. And it just knowing, okay, these guys definitely did it and they're dead. Closure. As opposed to, okay, these guys probably did it and they're dead, but if they didn't do it, then someone else is out there. And do I need to be afraid of this person? Am I ever gonna know? Did these family members just die for no reason? Just like all these questions floating around in your head that could be quieter if they were to definitively say these guys did it.
Right, but I mean, based on the admission of Smart with his psychologist, we feel like you got pretty good closure on the ladies, and not as much on the guys. There are too many similarities, so while he might have said, hey, I didn't kill the boys, he knew who did. We don't know who that other is for sure, because John may or may not be that other person, and we just don't have any evidence to say one way or the other.
So after decades of this, right, no leads, Sheila Sharp is growing more and more hopeless. She's calling the sheriff's office and for years is hearing no new leads, no new leads, no new leads. The case was finally reinvigorated, not reopened because it was never closed, right? But they're taking another look at it in current day with new technology. In 2012, the sheriff, Greg Hagwood, who we've mentioned a few times here, he was brought up in the town and he was only 16 at the time of the murders, and he knew the Sharp family personally. So he brings retired deputy and private investigator Mike Gamberg out of retirement, our boy Mike, specifically to re-examine this case, the Keddie case. Hagwood made it a top priority. Both Hagwood and Gamberg have a personal stake in solving this case because they both grew up there and knew the victims. Both of them have this really personal connection to it. This renewed focus quickly yielded significant results. On March 24th, 2016, a man using a metal detector discovered a hammer in a local pond near the Keddie property. We mentioned this earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And if you remember, this hammer precisely matched the description of the one Martin Smart had claimed to have lost around the time of the murders. Greg Hagwood stated that the location it was found, it would have been intentionally put there. It would not have been accidentally misplaced. The hammer was taken into evidence and tested for trace DNA or blood residue. And this discovery was a major breakthrough because it was the first tangible evidence connecting the main suspect to the crime. The most significant breakthrough came in April 2018 when Gamberg announced that DNA evidence recovered from a piece of tape at the crime scene matched that of a known living suspect. This DNA was from a piece of the white medical tape that had been used to bind the victim's hands and ankles. Unfortunately for us true crime fans, the identity of this living suspect has not been publicly released. DNA evidence obviously provides a direct, irrefutable link to someone that was physically present at the crime scene. And the fact that this suspect is living opens a whole new pathway for potential charges and finally bringing somebody to justice, even if it's not the primary killers. And this is the beginning of the investigators actually doing their job and, investigating. They also reevaluated the 911 call. The anonymous 911 call was found by Gamberg after 2013. It was in an apparently unopened envelope at the bottom of the evidence box and was never admitted into evidence initially, which really grinds my gears. Not a lot of things make me mad, but this is one of them.
You're my daughter. A lot of things make you mad.
No, not really. It's really the opposite. I don't get angry very often, but when I do, it's for good reason, okay?
I don't get angry often, but when I do, boy, do I get angry.
So now, as far as evidence goes, we have the hammer, the DNA from the medical tape, the 911 call, Martin Smart's letter to his wife, and the Daisy pellet gun.
And the confession to the psychiatrist.
Yes, and the confession to the psychiatrist. You're right. But as far as I think, tangible evidence.
Yes.
Current theories held by detectives suggest that there were more than two people involved in the totality of the crime. They think the disposal of the evidence and the abduction of the little girl points to at least 2 individuals that are alive and accessories after the fact. So he thinks 2 other people perhaps helped with disposal of the evidence and abducting Tina. So at least 4 people involved, 3 to 4 people. Authorities express confidence that they will put this together. If they do finally get these people, it would at least provide some closure, like we said, for the families and for the community, really. The Keddie murders had a profound and lasting impact on the surviving Sharp children as well. Sheila, Greg, and Rick were sent out of the state after the murders to live with their aunt, but later were placed in foster care and eventually separated. Sheila purposely pushed this experience out of her mind. I would too. She eventually co-authored a book called How to Survive Your Visit to Earth and recounts the killings and her theory about Smart and Budabe. She openly expresses her deep loss, saying that her mother never knew her great-grandchildren and that she misses talking to her. Sheriff Hagwood stated, "Things came to an abrupt, screeching halt, opportunities and experiences that were denied by such a cruel, heinous act. It's unforgivable." The community of Keddie itself has also struggled immensely with the unsolved crime. The Keddie murders are described as the most horrific crime in Plumas County history. Special investigator Gamberg said this killed this community. Keddie was gone. Keddie was absolutely finished. The house where the murders occurred, Cabin 28, was demolished in 2004. And the mystery has never been officially solved and is still considered open by the sheriff's office. Author David Keller, who's super cool and spent 20 years researching the case and interviewed over 100 people, noted that for a small town, this was a big deal. He said, "Everyone I spoke to said that back then the murders were all anyone talked about." He states the case is now almost 44 years unsolved when it could have been solved much closer to when it happened. Solving the case would, quote, lift an incredible weight to clear the dark skies that have hung over the community and the surviving family members. So in conclusion, these murders remain one of California's most haunting unsolved cases, and the fact that the 2 key suspects evaded justice for their entire lives make it even worse. Forensic technology is advancing all the time now, so I hope we can see a conclusion sometime in the near future. And my last thought here is, what other evidence maybe was never logged or never collected or even destroyed if this was a cover-up? That could be the only thing standing in the way of officially solving the case. All right, what are your thoughts, Dad?
Holy cow.
I told you.
You know, hats off to the 2 gentlemen that are working the case now. Most people could just say, no, it's too old, too hard, whatever. So kudos to them. You know, I feel so bad for the 3 kids. I can't imagine just how terrible it would be to go through that. And then to be split up from your siblings, you know, in the prime part of your life where you really develop those tight relationships, breaks my heart. Crazy. It'd be great if we see something on the news that says, hey, finally solved and here's what happened, but we'll have to just hold our breath there.
I just want to know who the living suspects are, because you know what I didn't look up is if Marilyn is still alive. Because the whole thing with the letter where she was like, oh, I don't remember getting that, but I recognize the handwriting. Like, was she, like, that's kind of sketchy. Was she in on it too? Like, did she know about it? Did she help with Tina, right? It was woman to girl. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, could be, and it could be under duress too. And then you don't want to be, you know, you didn't know all that you didn't know when you were helping, and then all of a sudden all this stuff comes out.
And you're an accessory.
And now you got to, you know, your fight or flight kicks in, and you're like, I'm just going to hide everything. I'm going to fly. So I hard to say what might have gone on, but that's what's going to be interesting, is to see what this, you know, physical evidence shows and what they might be able to extract from them at this point.
From the tape and from the hammer. They also have not released the results of the DNA from the hammer.
Right. That one's a little tougher because, you know, if it's my hammer, chances are my DNA's on it.
Yes, but if it's your hammer, your DNA's on it, and Sue's blood is on it, there's the connection.
Well, but say I had my hammer. It was, you already admitted it was kind of a safe town, so he kept his house unlocked. Somebody could have been happening by, saw the hammer sitting there, and grabbed it on the way. So that one, reasonable doubt, I think, is there. Whereas the tape, hey, no, it was used, and that DNA happened while it was being collected, right?
Yeah.
Or while they were taping things up. So that one to me is stronger. But let's say somebody else's DNA is on the hammer that we haven't talked about. That would be pretty obvious of, did maybe they borrow the hammer? There's always going to be this chain of evidence problem on the hammer, but it may give some clues.
And I think in combination with other things, right, other pieces of DNA, and then the hammer just kind of backs it up, I think that would be effective in court too.
Yeah. It's just all these things together that bring you to, this is the obvious conclusion from those. And even if it never went to court, if you just could get that out and look at it and say, okay, here's what we believe happened. The only thing you can maybe is a confession from any of the accomplices, or maybe murderers that happened to be there because they started to feel remorse 40 years later.
Yeah.
So that's just a crazy long time for this to be unsolved. Cool that they got some new hints, new leads. Can't wait to see what might happen.
Yeah, I hope we get some updates in the next few years here. I think we could have some updates since these two investigators are working so hard on it.
Could be a future Brinterruption.
True.
Brinterruption.
True.
Here's something from episode 17 that's now occurred, and
something better than my plants are alive.
I don't know. Plants alive is a good thing too.
No, it is. It's just boring. Well, Dad, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
This was a very gruesome case.
I told ya.
Yeah. Just disheartening to think of things like that, but I hope to find something here in the next few years that puts this all to rest.
I hope so too, and I'm glad I finally got you on here. I know you listen and support the podcast all the time, so it's really cool to have you on. And when I run out of people to have on the podcast, I will be circling back around for sure.
Didn't I see that you're soliciting for people to join you?
Yes, I am. Thank you for that plug. I am looking for guests for the remainder of June and July, even into August. So if you're listening and you want to be on the podcast and be a guest and come hang out with me and Boof and Basil and talk about murder, please message Friends Who Crime on Instagram @Friends Who Crime. But yeah, come hang out with me on the show. I definitely need guests.
And I will tell you, it's fun.
It is fun. Everyone's always so afraid, and they're like, "No, I couldn't do that." And then they get on the podcast, and they're like, "Oh no, that was fun." Like, yeah,
it's just conversational.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy.
All you gotta do is listen, really.
Yeah, that's what I did most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I got for you guys today. I will have a new episode for you next week on Tuesday. I'm trying to stick to the Tuesdays now that I'm editing. I'm trying my best. So if not Tuesday, definitely Wednesday, but I'm really aiming for Tuesday. And until then, remember, friends don't let friends commit crimes. Bye!
Do 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 do. Friend who cried.